My name is Sulaiman Patel. I'm actually on honeymoon in EOH. I'm here about 6 weeks. And one of the key things has been to try and be able to understand this particular landscape. So for me, IoT only forms a very small...
Sulaiman, excuse me, interrupt, I beg your pardon. Why don't you just tell people where you fit in?
So currently my mandate has been brought in that I'm sitting in the public sector domain and specifically with regard to looking and harnessing how we can essentially use industrial technologies to be able to go and add value to the public sector. So my focus and my scope is primarily with regard to the public sector and SOEs and looking at industrial technology in that. I know I'm quite surprised hearing you said there's 274 companies. I haven't even basically started to get an understanding of the quantum of that, right?
Somewhere around there.
Yeah. Okay. So for the journey in terms of IoT for me is very different because IoT only forms a very small component of the vertical within the digital technology stack. So in terms of this particular process, I want to basically share with you that when I came on board, I was essentially working on 2 or 3 projects, specifically the Border Management Agency. I'm sure everybody understands that it'll be the new amalgamation or agency that will take over various aspects of SARS, Home Affairs, and so forth. And one of the key areas was to try and come up with a digital strategy that we can look at. But part of that, for example, was to try and understand what's happening in the physical security space and so forth. And when I started meeting with some of the companies like Piet from BMSC, Kevin from Sukema, I then started to understand that there's a lot of duplication in the various areas that has been happening. And we said, guys, but why don't we get together and work on a modular approach in terms of what we're trying to do? So after me, Piet will come in and to basically showcase how working together as a different group of teams coming together as a matrix unit and working as a multidisciplinary team has achieved this. Okay, so So one of the critical areas that I'm essentially focusing on is on the local authority. We've taken the top 5 out of the 32 national departments, which is local authority, education, health, the built environment, transport, and energy. Plus we're looking at building management and obviously the top 10 SOEs. In terms of that, primarily I'm focused on the public sector value enhancement, and I'm trying to understand that how can we take what we have within industrial technology to help take this to a different level. So what are the business problems that we're trying to address in terms of this? The one is very similar to what we started. So when IoT wasn't even a buzzword, about 2012, 2013, we started on this journey in the built environment as part of government's national digital strategy. And in there, we started to say, how do we take all our immovable assets and be able to protect them, make them more smart, make them more intelligent, and by essentially trying to see that if we have all these huge buildings, how could we manage complex HVAC systems, lift management systems, building management systems? And through this process over the last 4 years, we started. At that point, we were still talking machine-to-machine technology, and obviously IoT and IoE have become the latest buzzword. So we started this about 5 years ago, and through this process, we have now moved on. In terms of what we want to try and achieve is to look at some of the projects, and the one that I'll be showcasing you as a case study is to look at energy sustainability and security. And on this particular area, we covered, for example, how going into a simple thing for energy security on a local authority, how we essentially took the whole IoT and created into a digital journey. Similarly, as part of that, there's a whole lot of value adds that coming around consumer safety, immovable asset lifecycle management, and a big plus is to say that this new digital journey shows a very different way of how we need to approach customers. So it's no longer based on CapEx. We know government has got some serious financial constraints and will have financial constraints over the next 5 to 10 years. So we have to find alternative models for trying to see how we can look at annuity-based revenue on this and using the digital strategy to try and achieve that. And last but not least is from a service delivery point of view for these different areas, how we can come up with an alternative way to engage with the digital world in terms of using IoT as a catalyst to enable that. So, if you then go on to the next slide, which looks at the outcomes of benefits, it's a very busy slide. But the reality is this, that these are all the key areas that we want to do. The one area that I want to touch on, which is a differentiator that we're now trying to promote, is to say that we want to look at the digital model using transaction-based costing. So if you take, for example, the city of Moscow, when they needed a CCTV surveillance system, everybody went in with a CapEx model. Cisco went in and started to charge them on a transaction-based model for surveillance and CCTV footage, one of the first in the world. So that means there's different ways that we can cut and dice this. So we want to say that that's what government would like, because the transaction basis and OPEX basis, and through that we want to try and push a build, operate, and transfer model. If we can achieve that, we then want to move towards an annualized OPEX versus CAPEX, because we know there's a restriction on CAPEX. So whatever we're doing in terms of outcomes and benefits needs to be focused on these 4 areas. The other part that we've also realized that EOH, with its 274 companies right now, there isn't a single center of excellence that can essentially showcase the digital solutions labs that we have. There are pockets of excellence, for example, within the CCTV area, secure mesh area, but there's nobody showcasing this. We're doing it on behalf of customers, and one of the things we said that for the public sector is to have a show and tell. So if you want to prove this thing and make it happen, one of the key things that we want to drive is to drive the center of excellence with industrial technology and the public sector, so we can actually show and have something like this, for example, upstairs, that people can actually come and see it. Most of us have been or work for multinationals like Cisco, 3Com. We've been to the US. We've seen their customer experience sessions or their executive briefing sessions or centers, and that's what we want to try and replicate and emulate with this particular process. And then on the product set, I think we're covering everything. Okay, so right down from IoT sensor and devices, which just forms a component, right down to all of the stuff going right down the stack. So there's a lot of stuff that's coming out of IT. There's a lot of stuff that's coming out of cybersecurity to fulfill this envelope of a digital stack, and that's what we want to do. So even some of the products that we want to look at needs to be looking at white labeling, open architecture. Government has got a rich, robust open architecture platform that they're now pursuing with a view to reducing licensing costs. Treasury is also promoting this in terms of reducing those type of costs against the normal licensing model. So we need to be able to embrace the open architecture and white label it as an EOH suite of products to be able to take it through. So I'm going to share with you a case study that we did, and this was for what we're trying to do. Here's a municipality called Buffalo City on the East Coast, East London, and one of the problems that they've had was they've had major problems with electricity theft. So they've got people stealing cable, they've got people stealing and from substations, they've got issues with regard to people stealing from prepaid meters, and that was the business problem. So when we looked at this as a business problem from an energy point of view, we said, how do we go and resolve this? So I said, when we presented to them a solution, we said, guys, while that is the key problem, you can't look at this thing only from a single point of view. Why don't you look at it as an aggregated, as a holistic whole from a digital perspective? And that's exactly what we did. So what we then did was we went and we said, guys, if you take Mdansane Township, which is just outside East London, the second largest township in Southern Africa, we said essentially we can geofence this whole particular area as your big problem area, and through this we can come up with a way that we then create a architecture that we essentially then follow. So you will notice that with myself and Piet coming up next, we have the same modular architecture that we're following. So we said today, if you create a physical protection layer, okay, we'll have a protection layer that will cover Mdansane Township, and that would, for example, have closed circuit TV with digital analytics on the smart end. But then we take it one step further. We then harden it. And as we harden this particular layer, utilizing IoT technologies, we then create a preventative layer. So what we then do, on the outside, you've got all of your different type of devices. So whether it's your digital analytics, you've got your IoT sensors, and we take it forward. So we gave an example that one of the biggest problems, what's the biggest problem in informal settlements today, guys? Fire, right? If you look at it every single year, whether without fail, we have shacks burning virtually every second week in South Africa. So we said not only will we do that, if we use an IoT sensor, so if Piet basically puts an IoT sensor down, which is, for example, a thermal camera or an infrared camera, now with that same technology, if we have an IoT smoke sensor or a heat detection sensor, we'll be able to see that if that shack is burning, where it is geolocated, and tell the guys immediately using a GPS coordinate to the fire response team where to essentially go through. So now we're not only achieving the capability of being able to protect the substation, to protect the fact that people are putting illegal cables in, but utilizing the IoT sensor, we will now be able to pick up additional areas in terms of safety and security for the community, fire and those areas. So If we then take all of the different type of sensor type of technologies together with the different type of responses we could do in that area, we could then achieve where we want to go. So from a protective layer that we now initially put in, we now create a preventative layer. That means we can now actually see outside that area. So if they're stealing from the grid, from the existing grid, we'll then be able to actually holistically be able to view it, and we can actually see who actually does it. The second problem is the guy who's doing the illegal connections is the same guy that's constantly doing it, because in informal settlements, there's a money-making racket that's going on. Whoever connects up, he gets money every single week. So is that part of the problem? He gets annuity income for connecting the informal settlement to your grid. So part of that process is we'll be able to use the camera and be able to see who or she is. Now remember, there's no enrollment. So on the back end, as part of the preventative layer, we will then have a smart analytics using behavioral technologies, behavioral analytics. We can see the person using facial recognition. We can have a learning algorithm using AI and be able to pick up who that individual is and who or he or she is in terms of what they're doing. We then go the next step. We then have a command and control center. Through this particular process, you have your data centers that we now to create, because all of that data needs to be aggregated somewhere, and through that we can actually view and monitor. We then add one more layer above that. We then go to a predictive layer. So this predictive layer now goes in and has smart intelligence built in. We're using the physical inputs, the sensory inputs, together with big data. We now have the capability of bringing AI, BI, etc. as part of it. So all your Hadoop, all those type of stuff that needs to come in to aggregate this content data, we then start managing it. So we've taken what was just normally a simple problem and created a complete solution that we can take this local authority into. All right, let's move on. So once we've done that, we now also understand that within the core, your data becomes important. How we get this data, how we need to move this data, and what type of transport mechanisms that we need to do. So we're protecting the assets of the local authority, plus we're protecting the consumers or the citizens in that area, and we emphasize the importance of data management. So the opportunity to on-sell additional services to the local authority with regard to that. And all of that then moves into what we've done very well in the city of Western Cape. We've created an emergency control and command center where we can have an integrated response. For example, we've used SAP on the back end to be able to achieve that. We could simulate and we could replicate that particular model in this. More than that, if we create the center of excellence, because most of the local authorities cannot afford their own, there's no reason why EOH cannot create this command and control center and sell it onto the local authorities as one single hybrid virtual center. So those are the options and opportunities that we can present on it. This is just a logical infrastructure that we've essentially set up and to basically show part of the intelligence. So for example, the likelihood of somebody stealing substation equipment or a pump equipment or anything of that sort, the threat is not naturally from the outside. Somebody from the inside has given them that information. So that means logically we can go right down, for example, if there's an end user that sits on this side here using end user behavioral analytics, we can then find out that he gave that information about that substation or that pump station that was then leaked out via email, via WhatsApp, via any social media, and we'll then be able to track it. So if the threat does occur and we can basically we can see that a cable was stolen from somewhere else, and at this particular area, we can actually physically, using AI, using BI, link that directly to the user on the inside that essentially does that. So we're giving a complete composite using the PSIM technology that also then comes in, which Piet will basically talk a little about more as we go on. Okay. Similarly, we said that if we want to achieve this, the other thing that we're now doing for the local authority or for any of the customers we're going in, we're telling them, guys, that if you want to engage in this new order of the digital world, you need to be able to have a common digital data environment. You can't still just basically be looking at ERP data warehouses or not. That means you need to be able to understand the sensor and IoT world and how you bring it in. For example, we said you could use Hadoop as an architecture on this side here. Similarly, you can then take structured data, unstructured data, and semi-structured data, bring it in, and we're creating a complete composite solution for you. We have a content intelligence, we have a content management platform. So literally, we've taken IT, we've taken IoT, we've taken infrastructure, and we brought this on. So the customer can either have the service of managed services, or you can have an option in terms of taking it forward. So the reality is this: we're giving the customer a complete, holistic digital experience. That's what they want to see. They do not want to see pockets of people coming in. Tell me how to resolve my problem holistically and showcase how the budget can be extending to us and improve my total cost of ownership and give me lower my total cost of ownership and give me a higher return on investment. So that in a nutshell is where we're at. So the principal approach is what we've now taken is to say that command and control center makes you proactive. We take immovable assets of the state, we basically make it visible, and through that process we then create an architecture where we're saying that we now have situational awareness. We move from a digital framework where we use IoT to create that as a context aware. And that's more or less what I'm going to just share with you. Piet, do you want to basically continue and take it forward? And we can scale it, for example, into other areas. And this was the area that we looked at. We looked at energy management, and we can go into each of these areas, nuclear, gas, trains, and so forth, across the platform, and that's where we can take it. Good.
All right.